climate change and our carbon footprint. So, you don't have to write these down. This is just an overview of the questions we will address. What is climate change? What is likely causing it? Why should we care? And what can we do about it? And at the end, I'll ask you guys each to write in your journal, what is one thing you could do to reduce your carbon footprint? So these are the questions we're going to go through. Again, you don't have to write it down, but just to be aware that this is what we're going to be looking at. So first and foremost, what is climate change? We hear the term a lot. We hear people talk about it. We need to be educated enough to talk about it ourselves. There are three terms. I put two of them on the slide. But there are three words or terms for climate change that all essentially mean the same thing. Climate change, global warming, and climate disruption. Climate disruption is a more recent term which just emphasizes how drastic and radical and crazy these changes are. But all those terms really mean the same thing. Climate change and global warming. They both refer to major changes in weather patterns over a long period of time and globally. So you might hear some people say, well, we had a really cold winter last winter. How can there be global warming? It's not just about one winter or one cold day. It's about changes that have been taking place for years, decades even, and not just in one place, but across the planet as a whole. So scientists are measuring the average surface temperature of the whole planet. It's not just about Chicago. It's not just about California. It's not just about Australia. It's the whole planet, and it's over decades, even centuries, that these changes have been taking place. Do climate changes happen naturally? Yes, they do. The ice ages were natural climate changes. And some people would argue, well, the climate changes naturally. Why is it such a big deal that the climate is changing now? Two reasons. First, it's human caused. We're causing it. It's not natural. And it is unprecedented. The changes we're seeing now are unlike anything that has ever been seen before. So people who argue that, it's kind of like saying, people die anyway, why shouldn't we kill them? The climate changes anyway, why shouldn't we cause it? That is a dumb argument. It is not an argument. So if you hear people say stuff like that, well, the climate has changed naturally in the past, so it's okay. No, it's not. That's like saying it's okay to kill people because they die naturally. Question, Kyle?
Yeah, what was the third one? You said climate change, global warming, what was it?
It is unprecedented, and we'll come back to that. So thank you for asking. Good listening. This cute little picture, which I got from a children's book, kind of shows the impact of the sun's radiation on our planet. The only reason we have any heat at all is from the sun, right? So the sun, the happy little sun, radiates heat and light. Much of that energy hits the planet. Some, not all of it, is reflected back into space. Some of that energy is trapped or retained by our atmosphere, the air around our planet. If there were no air around the planet, it would be cold, like Mars. There'd be no life at all. So the atmosphere does trap some of the sun's heat, and that's a good thing. But when we start adding greenhouse gases to the atmosphere traps more of the sun's radiation and heats up the planet. So now the sun is sad because the sun doesn't want to hurt the earth. I'm kidding, right? It's a kid's book, but I like the little pictures. So what we see is the sun's radiation hits the planet, but instead of reflecting off into outer space, more of it is trapped. Some of it still reflects off into space, but more of it is trapped than in the past. So let me give you an analogy. So here's the technical way to say it. Increases in the concentrations of greenhouse gases are trapping the sun's radiation and causing the surface of the planet, the oceans, and the lower atmosphere to warm gradually over time. This is a gradual process. That's how you'd say it in a very technical way. It's kind of like this. You shut your poor little animal in the car on a hot day
No.
with the windows closed, and what happens?
No.
Everybody freaks out.
That isn't even a good example.
So the sunlight, the sun's radiation goes into the car, but the closed windows keep it from escaping, so the inside of the car heats up, and that poor little animal's gonna fry. You're gonna have a fried little hot dog in there when you come back, right? We don't want that. But that's what we're doing to the planet.
Shitty.
So when you think of global warming, this is what you should think of. These are the three main climate change causing greenhouse gases. Just be aware of what they are. Carbon dioxide is probably the biggest. Methane is second. Methane, CH4, and then nitrous oxide. Carbon dioxide is the biggie. That's the one we're going to focus on, so definitely be aware of that one. But methane is also a big and, in fact, growing contributor to climate change. So these are the greenhouse gases that, when there's more of this in the atmosphere, the concentration goes up, the atmosphere traps more of the sun's heat, and the temperatures rise. Question?
So what is methane?
It's a combination of nitrogen, where's my methane? No, hydrogen, carbon and 4 hydrogen atoms. It does have a source, which we'll talk about, at several major sources. It is a natural gas, but we're finding it in too high of a concentration in the atmosphere. Good. One place it comes from is landfill. So if you see a landfill like Mount Trashmore in Munster, there's little pipes stuck in the landfill that to release the methane from it. Yeah.
Well, didn't the golf course be a landfill?
It was over a slag heap, an industrial slag heap. Mayor Dwayne D'Lo was
Because
responsible.
when I was little, it was a landfill. It was considered a landfill.
It was an industrial slag heap. I don't know if it was a land. The Centennial thing in Munster was. That was over a landfill. The new park in Munster. Okay. These are some numbers for you. You don't have to necessarily memorize them, but be aware of what they mean so that you can talk about climate change in an educated way. The abbreviation ppm refers to parts per million. That is a scientific way of talking about concentrations or densities. So if you took 1 million cubic feet of the atmosphere, before the Industrial Revolution, 280 of those feet would have been carbon dioxide, naturally from the planet. The Industrial Revolution, which you guys will read about in a couple of weeks in your humanities textbook, and we're going to talk about it in here, the Industrial Revolution is when human beings started to use a lot more machinery and burn a lot more fossil fuels. Since then, the global concentrations of CO2 have gone way, way up. Scientists have been measuring it directly since the 1960s. In 2005, according to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, there were 379 parts per million CO2 in the atmosphere. Now, it's up over 400. The most recent report by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and it's alarming, says we're up over 400. Many scientists think that in order to have a future, we need to bring those numbers back down to 350. So there's an organization, if you're interested in taking action on this issue, called 350.org. They're advocating for addressing climate change. Okay. This graphic is from NOAA. There are two sources I just want you to be familiar with. NOAA is a United States agency. It's a branch of the federal government. These are the guys who give us our weather forecasts. So whenever you look up a weather forecast on your phone or hear it on the news, NOAA is where they're getting the information. It stands for National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, but it sounds like the guy from the Bible who built a boat when he found out there was going to be a flood, right? Noah, ha ha, funny, funny. I'm sure somebody did that on purpose. So just be aware, NOAA, which is a United States agency, is telling us climate change is happening. So for the past 800,000 years, the concentrations of CO2 in our atmosphere have likely been below 300 parts per million. But now we're measuring these numbers directly, and those jumped. to over 400. How do we know about 800,000 years ago? Scientists have to infer. Keaton, you look like you're on a phone, so stop. They have to look at data from evidence like tree rings and ice core samples and other geologic. You can eat, that's perfectly fine. I just don't want anyone on phones or other electronics. You might be looking at porn for all I know. I don't want that in my classroom. Seriously, guys, we'll take a break, so turn the phone over so it's not a distraction. Okay. So, greenhouse gases are just spiking. These are the two main sources of information that are reliable. So this is where these data are coming from. Just be aware of it, because when people challenge you on this, you have to say where you're getting your information. That's just good critical thinking. The IPCC is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Every 5 years, they produce a report like this. It probably weighs 10 pounds. More than 500 scientists from all over the world put these reports together. So they speak for the majority of the world's scientists. Are there a few scientists who disagree and think that climate change isn't happening? Sure. But most of the world's scientists would agree climate change is happening and it's having radical impacts on our lives. And we're causing it. So those are the two main sources, NOAA and the IPCC. Okay. You don't have to memorize all this, but just be aware that the IPCC is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. It is the world's meteorological association. Again, they produce reports every 5 years or so, and they just came out with one. It is not a couple of fringe wacko scientists. So you don't have to write down or memorize all of that information. Just be aware in a general way of what the IPCC is. Okay? So, of course, there are people out there who want to hide their heads in the sand and say, climate change isn't really happening. Do we know of any political figures who think that right now? Donald Trump. He says it's a hoax by the Chinese. There's a person running for Senate in Indiana, and it's going to be a close race, so your votes could really make a difference. Mark Braun. I don't know whether he's a climate change denier, but extra credit if you can find out. I would like to know, because I'm going to vote in this election, and I haven't decided whom to vote for yet. Mark Braun or Joe Donnelly, the incumbent? Isaiah.
So, if you're a resident, so I have an apartment out here, and I have an apartment in Chicago.
Did you register to vote in Indiana?
Well, I'm just saying, can I?
If you don't vote in Chicago, you could vote here. Today is the last day to register online at indianavoters.com. So you could. But then you'd sort of be transferring your vote. You couldn't vote in both places because that's corruption, right?
Oh, yeah.
But so you'd have to transfer from Illinois to Indiana. You've got some close races in Illinois too. Don't you have a governor's race?
Yeah.
And are you voting for the mayor of Chicago?
Oh, that's not.
That's next year. That's a big deal.
Yeah, the mayor.
Yeah, big deal. He's stepping down, right?
Yeah.
Rahm Emanuel. Yeah. You guys followed what happened over the weekend with the verdict in the trial of the police officer who shot Laquan McDonald, right? He was convicted. This is a turning point. Has he been sentenced? That would be a good thing to research if you're interested in it. We should talk more about it.
Did you hear what Isaiah said?
No.
He only got sentenced 3 years.
That was it? Well, it's disappointing. Okay, yeah, right. Put him on the south side. All right. Let me talk a little bit more, then you guys can take a break, okay? Give me a couple more minutes. So here's another argument from some of the climate change deniers. The science isn't really certain. That is true. But here's the thing. Do we have any science majors in the room? Excellent, Faith. You know this already. The conclusions of the physical sciences are never 100% certain, only more or less likely. So scientists know with a high degree of likelihood, but not complete certainty, that we are causing climate change. This is very similar to something that was happening in the 1970s. Our nation was going through a debate about whether smoking causes cancer. Right?
Well, the debate that like sometimes it's because like when you smoke, like exercise, you can't breathe as well. So I think
That might have been one of the arguments. But scientists were beginning to realize that smoking makes you sick. Who did not like this?
Smokers?
Well, not just smokers.
Smoking companies?
The tobacco companies. The companies that make money from selling cigarettes. So they tried to block it. They tried to hide the truth from the public and cast doubt on the science. We are still not 100% certain that smoking causes cancer, but listen up. We're certain enough to act. So climate change, it could be argued, is the same thing. Are we 100% certain? No. But we're certain enough to act, because this is really bad news. All right. Here is another diagram that shows increases in the atmospheric concentration during the time that we've actually been able to measure it with our own instruments since about 1960. These data are from the IPCC report. So the trend is the same. It has been going up, and up even more sharply and dramatically in recent decades. If I'm not mistaken, the past 2 years have been the warmest years on record globally. So the atmospheric concentrations of CO2 are rising, the temperature of the planet is also rising. You guys want to take a break now?
Should we just keep going and get out of here?
Yeah, right. No, I'm going to change that number. Do you want to take a break now or keep going for a little bit?
Keep going for a little bit.
A little bit, okay, give me 5 more minutes. All right. Here's where the word unprecedented comes in. This is just, you do not have to copy all of this down. But just be aware of this. The changes that we're seeing now, to the best of our knowledge scientifically, have never happened before in the history of the planet. The climate is changing faster than it has ever changed before. Living organisms cannot evolve rapidly enough to adjust to those changes, so they're dying. We're losing species. So warming of the climate system is unequivocal. That means we know what's happening. Since the 1950s, many of the changes are unprecedented. These things have never happened before. We're losing ice cover, glaciers and sea ice. The temperatures of the oceans have risen. The oceans are becoming more acidic. So certain life forms, like little animals that have shells, can't live in the more acidic oceans. So the changes that we're seeing are more rapid and absolutely unprecedented in the history of the planet. And the sea level has risen. People who live along the coastlines in this country, they are not going to be able to live there anymore. Some of them are already leaving. Louisiana, North Carolina, Newark, even New York City. Isaiah?
They were saying in Boston, I was reading an article in Boston, they were predicting in 5 years that Boston is going to be under sea.
Underwater. So if you want to invest in real estate that's about 30 miles inland. It's going to be beachfront property pretty soon. Yeah, that's a really good one, Isaiah. You're paying attention to what's going on. Kayla, did you have a comment too?
No.
Stretching, catching flies? Okay, that's good. Okay, and people who live on little islands, small islands, nations, they will be gone. Those people will be leaving. So where do all these greenhouse gases come from? That's what we got to talk about next. This is why we are responsible. Carbon dioxide, and let's focus in on that one because it's the major culprit. Carbon dioxide comes from burning fossil fuels. A fossil fuel is anything with carbon in it, and carbon comes from life forms. So anything organic, anything that has carbon in it is something that was once alive. Oil, petroleum, comes from plants that were alive millions of years ago and rotted. So petroleum actually is stuff that was once alive. So CO2 comes from burning fossil fuels. NIPSCO, which gives us most of our electricity in Northwest Indiana, generates almost all of its power from burning coal. They do get some from wind energy now. Those big windmill things, those are sustainable. We burn coal to make electricity. We burn gas, which is made from oil, which is a fossil fuel for our transportation, for cars, for driving. So this is where our CO2 comes from. Methane, a lot of it, comes from cow farts. Cows fart. And believe it or not, this is a major contributor to climate change. So if you eat beef, and I do, I confess it, you're contributing to climate change because you're creating demand for cows and egg farms. Sad, isn't it? So last but not least, another source of CO2 is land use changes. So let me explain this a little bit. Plants and trees absorb carbon dioxide. They take it in. But we're cutting them down. So by removing a lot of trees, we're adding carbon dioxide to the atmosphere because we're removing the things that are taking it away. So we're taking away trees, which means we're taking away these things that naturally remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. So adding more trees would be one way of helping with this problem. So land use changes, the chopping down of forests, the paving over everything, does account for some of the increase in carbon dioxide that's causing climate change. Okay, now let's take a 10-minute break. Come back at 12:47-ish. Break till 12:47.
Yeah, I did my 1 carry pizza on bridge. I can't practice with you guys the whole week.
Let me stop my camcorder, I'll be right back.